I was standing beside my father's casket when the email came through. The phone vibrated once in my pocket. I didn't check it right away. I waited until the service ended, until the people who pretended to care had filed out of the chapel with their polite sadness and careful hugs. I sat alone in the front row, fingers numb, silence pressing in like cold glass. Then I opened it. Subject, company closure message. Company closed. You'll get nothing. That was it. No signature, no explanation, just the clean, brutal finality of a knife already buried. Marcus had waited for this exact moment, my father's funeral, to make his move. I just closed my laptop. No expression, no drama. I didn't even blink. "Good luck, Marcus," I said aloud. That was the last thing I allowed myself to say that day. The air smelled like old varnish and lilies, the kind of artificial peace you only find in funeral homes and courtrooms. Outside, it had just started to rain. Not the romantic kind. The grey, indecisive drizzle that just makes everything feel heavier. My hands were still, my heart wasn't. Marcus and I had built that company together over 2 decades. I had trusted him like a brother. I had been in the trenches with him when we had nothing, eating gas station sandwiches and drafting floor plans on napkins. Now, with my guard down, he erased me like a typo, but I didn't react. I didn't scream. I didn't call him. I went back home, changed my clothes, cleaned the kitchen, took out the trash. Then I sat in silence for an hour, watching the cursor blink on an empty Word document. There was no rage, just calculation. He thought I was broken. That grief had made me slow. He thought the timing would disarm me, cut off my ability to respond, to fight back. He was wrong. I knew Marcus, knew how he moved, how he thought, how he covered his tracks. What he didn't know, what he had never cared to understand, was that I had quietly prepared for the worst long before he made his play, because I had seen the signs, the delays in reporting, the legal documents he insisted on reviewing alone, the sudden name changes on accounts. I didn't confront him then. I watched. I documented. I learned. He thought he was wiping me out of the picture, but I had already stepped behind the frame. This wasn't going to be a screaming match. There would be no threats, no lawsuits thrown in haste, no loud revenge, only precision and time. He took everything I had worked for, but he forgot one thing. I wasn't angry. I was focused. I met Marcus when we were both just starting out, 2 engineers fresh out of college, drowning in debt, and hungry to build something that would last longer than we did. We were introduced at a subcontractor meeting, bonded over our shared hatred of unnecessary meetings, and ended up grabbing a beer that night. The next day he called me and said, "You and I, we could build a company that outsmarts all these clowns," and we did. We worked out of my garage for the first 2 years. Concrete dust on our shoes, bank statements that barely made it above zero. We lived like soldiers in a war no one else could see. There were no investors, no mentors, just coffee, deadlines, and an irrational belief that the world would eventually notice the work we put in. He was the talker, the seller, the one who could walk into a room and walk out with signatures on contracts. I was the builder, the draftsman, the one who stayed up until 3 a.m. triple-checking load calculations and verifying material orders. We made it work. Our strengths covered each other's blind spots. Until slowly I realized one of us had stopped covering mine. The first big contract came in year 5, a government infrastructure deal. Suddenly we were hiring teams, moving into a real office space, upgrading our equipment. Marcus celebrated like a man who had just won the lottery. I celebrated like a man who knew the real work was just beginning. By year 10, we were local legends in our field. 2 partners who never took outside money, never compromised on quality, and always delivered early. That was the story we told others. The real story was more complicated. Somewhere between year 12 and year 15, Marcus started changing. He traveled more, business trips that didn't always make sense. He got involved in circles I had no interest in, luxury golf clubs, vague networking groups, high-end fundraisers that sounded more like laundering schemes than charity events. When I asked him about some discrepancies in the tax filings one year, he brushed it off. "You're paranoid," he said. "I've got it covered. I should have pushed harder, but I didn't because I trusted him and because I didn't want to. Admit what I already feared, that the man I started this with wasn't standing next to me anymore. The cracks widened over time. He stopped showing up for site inspections, delegated everything, spoke in buzzwords instead of plans. The last few Christmas parties, he barely stayed an hour. The staff noticed, but no one said anything. Why would they? The company was thriving. Bonuses were being paid, deadlines met, profits up, but something had shifted. I noticed him avoiding my calls. Passwords changed on our shared server. Bank documents arriving at our office, but addressed only to him. I asked questions, calmly. I never accused, just observations. He responded with charm and deflection. You worry too much, Dan. I stopped. Tasking. I started saving. Bit by bit, I backed up files, scanned contracts, stored everything on a private drive. I opened a separate bank account. Quietly. No transfers, just new deposits. My wife didn't even know. I began keeping a written record of meetings, what was said, what wasn't. Not because I expected a betrayal, but because I knew in my gut one was already happening. The last meeting we had before my father died was brief. He seemed distracted. When I mentioned my dad's worsening health, he barely nodded. I could tell his mind was somewhere else, already planning something I hadn't been invited to. Still, I hoped that I was wrong, that maybe I was just tired, just grieving in advance. But deep down, I knew that Marcus had stopped. Being my partner a long time ago, he was just waiting for the right moment to stop pretending. And when my father died, he found it. After the funeral, I started re-watching the past like old surveillance footage, frame by frame, with a different lens. There were so many things I had missed, or maybe deep down refused to see. Emails that had gone unanswered for too long, deals signed without my review, clients I never met, but who appeared in quarterly reports as major contributors. And then there was the new company. It was buried. In the fine print of a document I almost ignored, a filing for a strategic restructuring. Something Marcus had always insisted was routine, a placeholder, legal maneuvering. But now I saw it clearly. He had created a mirror company. Same services, same suppliers. Even some of our own staff had been transitioned over, quietly, without fanfare. He hadn't dissolved the business out of failure. He had cloned it to leave me behind. My name was stripped from everything, and it wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. A deliberate, orchestrated removal. I found a memo he had sent to our accountant just 2 weeks before my father passed. It detailed a timeline, a date for dissolution, a set of instructions to move relevant contracts under a new entity. The name of the new company? Argentum Corp. A name we had brainstormed together once, years ago, as a potential rebrand. Back then it was a fantasy. Now it was a weapon. He had been planning it all along. What cut the deepest wasn't the money. It wasn't even the business. It was the years, the loyalty, the fact that I had built every wall, signed every blueprint, mentored every junior engineer, while he had slowly been removing my fingerprints from the legacy we made. Still, I stayed. Silent. I never sent an angry email. I didn't call him to ask why. I didn't beg for my share. Instead, I got to work. I went through our archives, our cloud storage, our shared drives. I accessed old backups, retrieved emails from staff who had left years ago. I spoke to former clients, casually, respectfully. What I heard confirmed what I suspected. Marcus had been laying the groundwork for years, shifting key relationships, under his name isolating me from the decision-making circle. But he had made one mistake. He thought I wasn't paying attention. He forgot that I had designed the structure of our internal systems, that I had access to admin-level backups, that I had quietly kept receipts, literal and metaphorical, for everything we built. I wasn't collecting out of paranoia. I was documenting history, because somewhere along the way, I had realized something no one else had. Marcus didn't just want to take the business. He wanted to erase the version of it that had me in it, and to do that he needed to wait until I was too broken to fight back. But grief, when it settles, doesn't always leave you empty. Sometimes it leaves you sharp. By the time I closed the last folder on my laptop that night, I wasn't angry, I was prepared. The next morning I made coffee the way I always had. Black, no sugar, no noise. Then I opened a new notebook. Not digital, not traceable, just ink and silence. On the first page, I wrote one word in all caps: rebuild. Not out of hope, out of intention. I wasn't going to get back at Marcus, I was going to get ahead of him. The first call I made was to a man named Lewis, a forensic accountant I had worked with once during a compliance review on a city project. He was meticulous, discreet, and owed me a favor. "This is personal," I said. "I figured," he replied. "When do we start?" Next, I logged into an old encrypted server I had set up years ago, when we were bidding on an international contract. Marcus had forgotten about it. Most people did, but not me. Inside were archived versions of every major document we had signed, including the original partnership agreement, audit reports and system logs from internal communications. Then came the quiet visits. I went back to our oldest suppliers. Not the flashy ones Marcus had recently started favoring, but the small, loyal vendors who knew my name, not just the company logo. I asked simple questions. I got honest answers. Yes, Marcus had shifted accounts. Yes, new contracts had been signed, under a different entity. No, I hadn't been mentioned once. Every move he made had left traces, and I knew where to look. At night, I started rebuilding a map. Not a business plan. A legal architecture of what had been stolen and how. Payments routed through shell companies, duplicate invoices submitted to both firms, staff contracts altered without notice. But it was never just about the paperwork. It was about timing. I couldn't strike too soon. If I did, I'd look like a bitter ex-partner. If I waited too long, assets could disappear. Accounts could vanish. Names could be changed again. So I became deliberate. I contacted a legal firm in another state, one that specialized in corporate fraud. I didn't use my full name at first, just initials, just questions. When I finally sent them my files, the lead counsel called me personally within 48 hours. "This is serious," he said. "I know," I answered. They agreed to work under NDA, quietly, strategically. From there I moved on to people. Not many, just a few. One former project manager who had been let go without cause a year ago. One receptionist who'd been uncomfortable with the new tone in the office. One junior engineer who had reached out to me on LinkedIn months ago, asking if I was okay. All of them had stories. All of them had records they hadn't deleted. Marcus had thought he was cleaning house, but some houses have basements, and I had the blueprints. I stored everything on physical drives, kept backups hidden, paper copies secured. I used cache, burner phones, no digital trail that could be traced back to me before I was ready and through. It all, I never once confronted Marcus. I answered his occasional texts with professionalism, declined meetings politely, even congratulated him when I saw a press release about his new venture. I wanted him to feel untouchable, because that's when people get sloppy, and he did. One afternoon I received an alert I had set months earlier. Someone had logged into a financial reporting platform we no longer officially used. It was Marcus. He had just uploaded quarterly documents and forgot to change the metadata. His name was all over it, including the timestamps that proved he had been planning the shift months before the dissolution was filed. That was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment I knew I had him. Not in spirit, in proof. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. This was going to be a collapse on his terms, in his world, with his name on every page, and I'd be nowhere in the frame when it fell. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. Marcus hadn't just tried to erase me. He had repurposed everything we built. Our branding, modified. Our best clients, retained through quiet renegotiations and backdoor channels. He hadn't started something new. He had taken my half and wrapped it in a new name. But theft has fingerprints, and I had them all. I requested copies of our tax filings from the last 5 years. Through a contact at the State Compliance Office, I was able to get redacted but relevant versions. The discrepancies stood out like bruises, mismatched values, asset transfers that didn't align with internal records, missing acknowledgements. Each anomaly was another line in my case file. I stopped sleeping 8 hours a night, not because I was anxious, because I was working. Every piece of evidence I uncovered, I wrote a small note beside it. Intentional or negligent. Most answers came quickly. Intentional. I started sending encrypted packages to my lawyer. Small doses, each one containing a section of the whole puzzle. He called me after the third package. "You know this could bring him down completely." "That's not my concern," I said. He paused. "Then what is?" "Accuracy. Because that was all I ever wanted from the start. For the record to be set straight. For the story, our story, the real one, to be seen for what it was. Not the illusion Marcus had been selling. I wasn't interested in payback. I was interested in precision. Then came the call I didn't expect. An internal auditor from one of our former clients reached out. He'd stumbled on some invoice overlaps, payments made to Argentum Corps for work that had already been completed by our old company. He thought it was a clerical error. I told him to hold that thought. I asked for copies. Redacted. Just enough to compare timestamps and signatures. They matched. Same job. Billed twice. Once under our company. Once under the new one. Same foreman, same crew, same materials. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me. He had committed fraud. Now I had what I needed. I compiled the final dossier. Cross-referenced every invoice. Every transfer, every altered document. I labeled each section with cold precision. Violation of fiduciary duty. Fraudulent misrepresentation. Theft of intellectual property. Deliberate concealment of assets. It was enough to launch not just a civil suit, but a criminal investigation. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. I needed one more thing. Silence. So I vanished. No updates. No warnings. I stopped posting. I disconnected. I let Marcus think I had folded, and he thrived in that illusion. He posted photos from corporate retreats, launched a flashy new marketing campaign, even gave a TED-style talk about resilience in leadership. He had no idea the walls were already shaking beneath him, because what he forgot, what most people forget, is that storms don't start with thunder. They start with pressure, and pressure was building. I had a choice. Press the button now, or wait for the perfect alignment, when the documents, the witnesses, the investigators, and the legal framework were all in position. I chose patience, because this wasn't revenge, this was gravity, and gravity doesn't shout. It pulls. It happened. On a Thursday, quiet morning, overcast skies. I was drinking tea instead of coffee. Small shift, but it helped me stay grounded. That's when I received the notification. The federal audit had been approved. I had waited 6 months for this moment. Every document I submitted, every witness, to account, every traceable thread of Marcus's fabricated company had built toward this. The auditors moved quickly. Their first step? Freeze all assets under Argentum Core. No announcement, no warning. Just a silent lock across every account Marcus controlled. He didn't even notice right away. The second step was more delicate. Subpoenas, issued discreetly, targeting key vendors, client contracts and internal bank transactions. The same accountant who once dismissed my concerns was now being interviewed under oath. I wasn't there for any of it. I was in a small cabin upstate, answering calls in short phrases, keeping my responses neutral. How did you uncover all this? One of the investigators asked. I was there when it was built, I said. I just followed the cracks. The third step was confrontation, though not mine. Marcus received a letter, formal, registered, a request for immediate appearance before a regulatory panel. He didn't post that one on social media, but I did receive a call. He didn't start with hello. He said, "You set me up." I said nothing. He repeated it, louder this time. Still, silence, because there was nothing to say. I didn't set him up. I just made sure his setup collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. I could hear his breathing tighten, rage bubbling under the surface, not because he'd been caught, but because I had been the one to catch him, quietly, completely. He hung up before I could respond. That's when I knew the fall had started. In the following days, 3 former employees came forward with formal statements. They detailed pressure to falsify dates, inflate project scopes, and redirect funds. One of them submitted screenshots of texts Marcus had sent, direct instructions to clean up the paper trail. Too late. The paper trail was already public. Court filings became available that Friday. Civil litigation for fraud, potential criminal proceedings for financial misconduct. His new company's name, Argentum Core, became the top search result under construction scandal in our state. Still, I never gave a statement. Not to the press, not to colleagues, not even to old friends who called out of nowhere. Suddenly remembering I existed, I didn't need to say anything. Marcus had already said enough, and the evidence did the rest. When the hearing was scheduled, I didn't attend. I watched a live stream, quietly, alone, with my phone face down on the table. Marcus looked smaller, tired, his signature charm replaced with legal hesitations and tight-lipped counsel. They presented my dossier, page after page, each one a nail. He tried to talk, deflect, but the timeline didn't lie. The numbers didn't bend, the witnesses didn't waver, and I didn't need to speak. I had already spoken months ago in silence through preparation. When the session ended, the judge declared a temporary injunction on all Marcus's assets. Pending a full trial, It was the beginning of his end, and I hadn't even raised my voice. Weeks passed. The news spread quietly at first, like a rumor people were too afraid to believe. Then it broke into the mainstream, not just because of Marcus, but because of who we had worked with: government clients, public money, infrastructure, tied to state contracts. This wasn't just a personal betrayal anymore. It was fraud on a public scale. That's when the federal investigators stepped in. They cross-referenced my files with their own data, found patterns, payments routed through consulting firms with no registered staff, vendor invoices for services that were never rendered, names that didn't exist, on payrolls that had been cashed. The day Marcus was arrested, it didn't make the evening news. It made the morning edition: white-collar fraud, tax evasion, forgery, wire fraud. The charges weren't theatrical, just methodical, each one backed by a document Marcus had signed, confident that no one would ever question them. But I had questioned everything, from the very beginning. And now, the system did too. The image that stuck with me came from a photo leaked to a blog. Marcus being escorted down courthouse steps. No handcuffs, no shouting crowd, just him, in a grey suit, looking around like the world had shifted under his feet. Because it had. He hadn't seen it coming. Because I never gave him a reason to. I never confronted him, never warned him, never tried to negotiate. Had simply vanished from his world and reappeared only through evidence. At the final hearing, my lawyer read a prepared statement. Just one paragraph. Nothing dramatic. No accusations. It ended with this line: "This is not about retribution. It's about restoration, not of a company but of truth." After the verdict, I turned off my phone for a week. I walked, slept, cooked my own meals, talked to no one. Then one afternoon I received a letter. It wasn't from Marcus, it was from one of our first interns, now a licensed engineer. He wrote, "I stayed in this field because of what you taught me. Integrity matters. Quiet strength matters. Thank you for showing me that." I didn't cry, but I held the letter for a long time, because in the end that was the only kind of legacy that mattered. Not the company, not the buildings, but the truth. The one Marcus tried to bury, and the one I had rebuilt, brick by brick, in silence. After everything ended, I didn't celebrate. There was no toast, no final punchline, no cinematic moment of satisfaction, just quiet. And that was enough. I sold my house, cashed out what was left of my personal savings, took only what I could fit into a single truck and drove north until the traffic disappeared and the noise of the past finally faded behind me. I settled in a small town that doesn't show up on tourist maps, a place where names still matter, and no one asks you what you used to be. There's a wood shop behind my cabin. It was abandoned when I got here, filled with rusted nails and sawdust from another life. I cleaned it, rewired it, built my own workbench. These days I make furniture by hand, no machines. And no, just wood, time and rhythm. I never talk about the company. If people ask what I used to do, I say something different, because it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I wake up with purpose, that I shape something real with my hands, that the things I build now hold weight, not just physically but morally. I adopted a dog. She was wandering near the creek one evening, ribs showing, tail tucked. I sat down on the porch and waited. Took 2 hours, but she came. She never left after that. I named her Nova, because some stars don't die, they just explode quietly and light something new. Sometimes people from my old world reach out. A message here, a letter there, some apologies, some confessions. A few just wanting to know if I'm okay. I don't reply to most. But one day a young engineer drove 4 hours just to find me. Said she heard I was the reason her former boss got his start. She asked if I could teach her how to design structurally. Sound foundations. I said yes, not because I missed the old life, but because I still believed in the original dream. A structure that lasts. One built on truth. At night I sit on the porch, Nova asleep beside me, and listen to the wind through the trees. No city sounds, no pressure, just breath and stillness. It took everything falling apart to understand what I really needed. Not recognition, not revenge, just peace. And that's what I found. Not because I won, but because I didn't break. I didn't scream. I didn't become what betrayed me. And in the end, I wasn't the only one Marcus tried to erase, but I was the one who didn't stay quiet,